joining us now on the Kirby on Sports podcast is Ben Standig. He is a reporter with The Athletic. He covers the Washington football team and the Washington Wizards, and he runs his own podcast, the Standig Room Only podcast. I feel like a podcast for you, Ben, was meant to be because the play on words with your last name. So I appreciate you hopping on with us. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing great. I appreciate that. Yeah, the podcast is fun. I don't think I've ever had anybody. I think people enjoy the name of the podcast more than anything I've ever written or anything else I've ever tweeted or done. So I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, The Athletic, it's been around for a little while, but I got one of your colleagues on, Tarek El-Bashir, but I'd like to ask you the same question. In your mind, how does The Athletic set themselves apart from any other news media outlet, in your opinion?
Tarek El-Bashir, that hack. No, just kidding. Tarek's my guy. How does it set us apart? I mean, I guess I'll just say this, and this is not me kissing butt to the bosses, because at one point a few years ago, I had my own subscription-based website with two other writers. And I think the thing is, it's just that the model of how these sites make money effectively is typically you need people to click on your site to generate the avenue advertising revenue from there, right? And that leads to, for say, a New York Times, the Washington Post, that's not that complicated. You're writing really important stuff. A lot of people are going to come, so on and so on. But when you're for some other sites, in order to get people to come, you have to write things to cater to that. What does that often mean? That's where the term clickbait comes in and things like that. And I know as a consumer that I don't like those sites necessarily. I want something real, something tangible, something that is interesting, thought-provoking. Yeah, sometimes it can be fun, but like whatever it may be. And then, so when you go the other way and you have a subscription model like The Athletic, and we had with the Sports Capital, then you're basically telling people up front, look, here's the deal. We're not going to have ads. By the way, also no video pop-ups, none of that stuff that drives us all crazy. At least I assume it does me. And you know, it's a relationship. You come to us, so help support us by, just like with anything else. You know, we all do all kinds of things all the time where we spend money on whatever it is. So you do that, and then we will in turn give you this that is hopefully you find this worth your time. And I think I don't know if I answered the question in an intelligent way, but like to me, that's the biggest difference between The Athletic and these other sites. Now, on top of that, The Athletic has gone out and hired, in most cases, excellent writers from across the country. I really can't believe that, like, I'm a teammate, I say in air quotes, with, like, you know, Ken Rosenthal, and like David Aldridge is my boss, and you know, I mean, Tarek, I'm making fun of him, but like, you know, he's a highly credentialed reporter, and tons of others in the market and throughout the country. So it's really an impressive group of people. And then I just think the format lends to better work, and then hopefully a better relationship with the consumers.
Absolutely. So, your jobs, I would assume it's been taking like a lot of ups and downs with this pandemic. When COVID-19 first started, I'm sure everyone like yourself, I asked pretty much everybody this, but as a reporter for The Athletic, how has your job changed during the pandemic? Are you enjoying the Zoom press conferences, or do you like the more in-person sort of thing? What's changed, and do you like the Zoom stuff better? Do you like the in-person stuff? I know some reporters say, oh yeah, I love you can build better relationships that way. But in your mind, how has it affected you?
Does anybody say they like the Zooms better?
Oh, I mean, not really, but I mean, for stuff like this, I mean, it's perfect. Like podcasting, I
Sure.
switched to Zoom. It's great, but I don't know. I assume that some people would have a different opinion on Zoom, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are certain aspects of the Zoom world that we're in that is better. Like this, you're right, doing a podcast and I have the same issue. It's not that bad and some of the things, but in terms of the job, no, it's not real fun. You know, at the end of the day, you want to have I mean, You don't want to have to ask the questions you're going to ask in front of all of your competition, more or less, and you want to be able to talk to certain people one-on-one. And technically we could do that sometimes. We could have some one-on-one interviews at times during the year, but it's different over the phone and over Zoom. I actually did a story during the season of like, what was it like for Ron Rivera and the players on the other end of the Zoom? And to me, that was an interesting story because you got sort of their perspective, and ultimately they, for them, it's not that bad. We're out of their way, but for us, we need to be around them to get to know them. And it's the subtle things also. It isn't just like, I'm going to get the big story. It's just get a better sense of who they are as people and vice versa. And I think all that helps in terms of like how the job has changed. That's the biggest thing. I mean, not having any access. As an NFL reporter, though, I gotta be honest, like it wasn't that dramatically different compared to the other ones. Like for us, we were already in the off season last March, when this all started. The NFL draft and free agency was about to start, the draft like a month later. So that was weird a little bit, but it effectively wasn't ultimately that different. And then we got through that, got to the off season, and then kind of went from there. Whereas like my colleagues who were covering the Wizards or the Nats or the Caps, and they were off for months. Like their seasons were paused. They were in this weird space of, wait, we're still going to keep playing. We're not going to keep playing. Like we don't know what's happening. They had no real access. I think it was tougher on them. So it's been weird for everybody for sure. I think on the NFL side, we were probably a little bit luckier. But honestly, for me, it's just more of like, I'm taking all this very seriously. I've been stuck in this house, and since the football team season ended, it might really have like gone nowhere. I basically just stayed in the house. I mean, more or less, and that part sucks. But I think that's everybody's problem.
Well, I mean, hopefully we can get through this one way or another. I can see a bright light at the end of the tunnel, just saying we're done with COVID. We can go back to normal. But I'm hoping that once again, we're joined by Ben Standig of The Athletic here on the Kirby on Sports podcast. Make sure you find him on Twitter at Ben Standig. He's also the host of the Standig Room Only podcast. I listened to the entire interview, the Jay Gruden interview. I think a lot of people were hyped over the Jay Gruden interview. You got him. Yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting points. Give me your thoughts on that whole interview.
Yeah, that was fun. It's the guest has got to be. You can tee the guest up all you want, but if they don't deliver, then it is what it is. But he, gave a lot of insight into his time in Washington. What he went through. I enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie, my memory is shot. The pandemic is not helping, and it's not been like a month. I don't even remember exactly 100% of what we discussed, but it was a lot of fun, and I definitely want to get Jay back on. But yeah, I mean, he had a lot of insight just into. Well, obviously he has the insight. He shared his insight into just sort of how things went there during his time. Both in terms of Dan Snyder, some Bruce Allen stuff. What just kind of his year in between, his next steps, and ultimately, like I said, it's just like with anything in life, right? If the person is compelling and interesting and fun and willing to share things with you, then that makes it for typically an easy conversation. And Jay is a lot of fun. So I enjoyed that chat for sure.
Yeah, it was a great, interesting show. Check that out on the Standig Room Only podcast once again. I want to get into some of the Washington football team. As we know, Washington parted ways with Alex Smith. That's not really what I want to discuss here. It's the big picture. Do you think, in your mind, Ben, that Alex Smith will get an opportunity to start somewhere else? In my opinion, I really don't think an NFL team's gonna go for him. I just feel like with his leg and its production on the back half of the season for the Washington football team, he just wasn't really producing. And I mean, granted, he broke his leg in 2018, came back, a remarkable story. And yeah, give me your thoughts on what you think the next steps are for Alex Smith, just in your opinion.
I mean, I think I'm generally with you. I mean, there's only so many teams left that have quarterback openings, and there's now going to be an influx of draft picks. It sounds like, probably 5 are going to get picked in the first round. I don't personally like starting rookies, but some teams obviously do. Then you still have this mishmash of free agents and some guys potentially could get traded. I'm not talking about the Deshaun Watson stuff, but like, your Marcus Mariotas, your Sam Darnolds, your Ryan Fitzpatrick's, whatever. This is the problem, of course, that the Washington football team faces, that none of those guys are particularly exciting, but you're going to have to probably bring in somebody. But all those guys are probably a little more interesting than Alex Smith, I think. I guess if I'm a team, where Alex Smith becomes interesting, like I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are like the obvious one because of his prior connection with Urban Meyer, his college coach. Bring in Alex Smith to either be the bridge to this younger quarterback, in their case, probably Trevor Lawrence, that's coming in, help be a mentor, that type of thing. So to that extent, maybe he could start the beginning of a season for a team while they have the younger player come on board. But look, he's a tremendous leader. Obviously, the story was inspiring. You hear nothing but positives from teammates and people around him about who he is as a person, as a leader, and he's a great example. So I could see that being attractive to somebody, but it just, man, you really have to be, I think, on a complete rebuild with a rookie, without anything, and with some sort of young rookie quarterback to say, hey, Alex, come here. We want you to be the starter flat out. I don't know. It seems unlikely to me, but, I guess his leadership qualities, maybe some will just value that above and beyond everything else. And I guess also, just to be fair to him, his recovery situation is so unprecedented that, I don't know, maybe somebody in the medical community says, hey, he got better. I mean, he did have the injury late in the year, of course, that's different from, not connected to the broken leg. But I don't know, maybe somebody says, oh, look, he made great strides, he'll only get better. I know nothing about those things, so I won't say. But yeah, I'm kind of with you ultimately. I just think, don't get why somebody would say we want him to start unless it's just that mentor-y kind of way.
Yeah, I absolutely. I agree with you on that too. So, I mean, there was really no right way for what, there was really no right scenario, in my opinion, that Washington could keep Alex Smith, because I believe he was asking for too much money and it was just too much on the cap. That Washington obviously needs somebody younger, whoever that might be. We don't know that answer quite yet, but it saved Washington a bunch of cap room. With that, they're like 50, 60 million with spending money. Besides a quarterback, where could you see Washington going and getting somebody at, what position wise?
So I kind of think their biggest concern, other than quarterback, is linebacker. That's clearly was the weakest unit on the defense last year. Ron Rivera had Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis, the peak version of Thomas Davis in Carolina, and he values that. He was a linebacker himself, of course, in the NFL, and he I think it's pretty apparent he recognizes that they need more there. Now, you could do that in the draft, of course, but you could also do it in free agency. I don't know if that means you spend $13-14 million. There's only a handful of guys that may be remotely interesting, but okay, to me, that would be the top need. The easiest solution in terms of spending money is wide receiver. They obviously also need that. I do think, I personally am not a big fan of spending money at that position, but okay, I get it. I would just say that I think wide receiver is an obvious one. I think that from there, left tackle, free safety, or as well, they need to re-sign Ronald Darby, or they're going to have to get another cornerback. It can kind of depend. We'll see where that goes. So I think those are probably the positions where I would say they need to spend. I mean, of course, there's some other things, backup tight end. They got to get some more defensive end depth behind Chase Young and Montez Sweat, things like that. But those are the big ticket items for me. Linebacker, they need wide receiver help, but we'll just see how much money I'm not a big fan, like I said, of spending big at that spot, but they're going to probably have to get some more help one way or the other.
So, speaking of the cap, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. Carson Wentz getting traded to the Colts, and the Eagles are like negative in the cap space, big time. I mean that's going to affect the Eagles one way or another. Looking at this cap situation.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing for a team like the Eagles, I don't think they're trying to win this year, I guess. So whatever. I don't know exactly the ins and outs of their situation, but there are teams like the New Orleans Saints who are still, trying to win the Super Bowl now, who are also way under the cap or way on the wrong end of the cap, and that a team like that, I think, is more interesting just from the standpoint of like, how do you make this work while remaining competitive? But yeah, for Philadelphia, they're, once they clearly the season went south for them. They've moved on from their coach, their quarterback, and they're clearly to some degree starting over, which is a probably reasonable thing to do. So like I said, I don't know exactly what they need to do, but they'll be, they'll be making moves and for the future in mind. Probably not so much the 2020 the 2021 season. I forgot what year it was.
Man, so I mean, news broke recently too. I sticking with the Washington football team for just another moment here, that they got rid of their cheerleaders in place of a co-ed dance squad. I know reporters don't really cover the cheerleaders, but I mean, yet again, it must have been terrible for the cheerleaders to find out about this news over social media.
Yeah, I mean, if that's how it sort of broke down, that's how it went. Yeah, I mean, that's not great for anybody to find out their future in that kind of way. This is just another one of these scenarios, but in terms of the cheerleaders overall, that's connected to the larger story about how this organization has treated people, and what are they going to do going forward. Obviously, there's bigger Dan Snyder news out there with his ownership, how in jeopardy is it, and things like that. This is part of that, and even if they're clearly making a lot of changes, brought in Jason Wright as the team president and so on. That may be going over well in terms of culture, but in terms of, starting to make some strides perhaps. But yes, if they found out on social media, that's not ideal. Obviously, just from a person to person perspective. Yeah, I don't know. There's always so much going on with this team, and this week has been a good example of that. I mean, we haven't even had that much to talk about in terms of the actual football side, other than the Alex Smith part. It's all this other stuff that's happening that's getting our attention.
I mean, in my opinion, and I keep saying this to myself and my buddies and my co-host and everything, the fact of the matter is, why does this always have to happen to Washington? It seems like Washington is only the only NFL team that causes the most drama non-football related.
I mean, it's certainly hard to argue over the last 2 decades that they've been pretty high in the power rankings one way or the other. Look, I mean, you're a young guy, so you'll eventually start having more work experiences and things like that. But there is one thing that is consistent, whether you're talking about sports or really any line of work that anybody does, that the success or failure of an organization effectively starts at the top. Whoever's at the top sets the tone for what's going to happen beneath, and that's why people can get mad over the years at Vinny Serrato and Bruce Allen and Jay Gruden and Mike Shanahan or Kirk Cousins or whoever else you want to get mad at. You might have some justification in that moment, but at the end of the day, one guy's still standing, and that's the owner. He's the only one that's been consistent around, and that's why, even though there's positive signs here with Ron Rivera in terms of the football, like if you could just look at the football side, be like, okay, well, they improved last year. The players really seem to buy into the player, to the coach, so on and so on, and that's all great. But it's impossible to ignore the Dan Snyder looms, and that based on his presence, things have been terrible more or less for the last 2 decades. In a general sense, and certainly, I mean, I grew up a fan of the team. Grew up in the DC area, and I was lucky enough to be in the Joe Gibbs 1.0 era and see the Super Bowl teams. And I was maybe too young to totally get like culture or things, but it was obvious, especially in hindsight, but even in the moment, that things went a certain way. And Joe Gibbs, Jack Kent Cooke allowed Joe Gibbs and Bobby Beathard to do what they needed to do, and to that end, everything kind of went as much as as hope you could possibly hope. There's a lot of luck to winning a Super Bowl, but the day in day out culture of a place is not luck. It is sort of, you build it a certain way or you don't. And Dan Snyder obviously has just been. It's not even that he's been terrible at it. I just don't know if he even understands what it takes on that front to be good. We'll see if the Ron Rivera situation holds, but it's hard to be completely optimistic knowing what's happened over the last 20 years.
So, one last question before we move on to some Wizards and NBA talk. I ask every reporter who is near to the Washington football team or covers the Washington football team about their thoughts on Alex Smith's remarkable journey. I mean, any way you look at it, it was a remarkable journey. I'd like your thoughts on the Alex Smith comeback in Ben Standig's mind.
Well, anybody who's ever heard me do an interview on on the radio or my podcast has heard me say some version of this, and that is, I don't think I've ever been more wrong about any topic, sports probably or otherwise. Well, not otherwise. I'm sure otherwise I've been worse. But in terms of sports, I don't think I've ever been more wrong. I didn't think for 1 second he would ever play. I didn't think he would pass a physical. I didn't think he would practice, make the 53-man roster, actually be active, actually play, actually not be terrible as it went on. And it was a point like during, I don't know, maybe it was around the Pittsburgh game or somewhere in there. It's just like, wow, are we not even talking about Alex Smith and the injury? We're just talking about a guy playing quarterback. It's a testament to his resolve, his will, that he wanted to do this and that he did do it. I remember talking to all kinds of people before the season started, Urban Meyer, Scott McLuhan, McLuhan drafted him in San Francisco. Urban Meyer was his college coach, and others who were like, I don't know how this is possible that this is happening. And yet they also said that when they were around him, he had a will, that was just unmatched in their time. And it's quite impressive. I think ultimately this is more of a national story than a local story. I don't think when people think of the Washington football team over time, they're going to think about Alex Smith, the player. They will always remember this incredible story. He won Comeback Player of the Year here. The football side, he kind of is ultimately going to be sort of a blip because he just didn't play that much. But just an unbelievable reminder that, no matter what anybody says, we can all achieve probably a lot more than we think. And he's a great example of that.
Great insight there on Alex Smith's remarkable comeback into the National Football League. Once again, joined by Ben Standig, host of the Standig Room Only podcast, writer for The Athletic here on the Kirby on Sports podcast. I want to dip into some NBA here. First and foremost, what do you cover more for The Athletic, the football team or the Wizards? Just a random question.
No, for anybody who's been paying attention to me knows it's a reasonable question. For The Athletic, it's pretty much at this point like 95% football team. I've written like a couple stories about the Wizards this year. Part of that is the pandemic and not going to games. Like if we were in the real world, now that we're in the off season, I would be going to most Wizards home games just because I enjoy it. And that was the thing I did more of. If you had asked me this before The Athletic, it would have been reverse. Probably like 70-30 Wizards, something like that. But it's just, to be competitive on this beat, it's kind of hard to focus on too many other things. And, between the lack of access and frankly, the Wizards, have largely stunk. Obviously, they've been better the last couple weeks, but in general, they have not been very good and not very interesting to boot. So there wasn't as much reason to go there. And, the other reality is that there's way more people interested in the football team than the Wizards. So from a business perspective, there's not that much incentive to focus on the Wizards. But that said, I still try to watch as many games as I can. Our Wizards guy Fred Katz, I go on his podcast basically once a week to talk about them, and I do contribute some things here and there. We have a story coming out, a couple of three of us coming out, I guess next week at this point, or I don't know when this is running, but a few days from now that I helped with. But yeah, it's mostly the football team at this point.
So I want to get your thoughts. Obviously, the Wizards at the start of this season just looked terrible. The John Wall trade for Russell Westbrook getting injured, then this huge COVID thing, but that was way back. But the Wizards are actually starting to improve, in my opinion. I mean, they're still under 500, but with how tight the East Division is, they're not too far out of a playoff spot. I know it's still early and whatnot, but this East Division, the Wizards are looking like they could have a shot at the playoffs. Just your thoughts in general on the Wizards and the East so far, how tightly contested it looks, and just tell me what you think the Wizards need to do to get into that playoff spot.
I mean, the East is terrible. It's really crazy just how, I mean, it's only been in the last couple of days that there's been more than 3 teams over 500. Now, I think obviously the pandemic, who knows how it's messed with any individual person or teams. Obviously, we've seen with the Wizards, it was a real cluster, a few weeks ago when they had to pause their season. They had a lot of guys who were testing positive at that point. So, definitely has caused some problems. So yes, they're in the mix to be in the playoffs. And going back to when they made the Westbrook trade, I think not knowing that Westbrook was not going to be 100%, as he clearly wasn't for a while, and it looks like he's closer now. Didn't know how that would affect things. The Davis Bertans arrived from being overseas throughout all this and was not in shape. And it really sent them down, spiraled down the wrong way. And they played basically 500 ball over the last 16 or 17 games, so that's a better sign. And I thought preseason they had a 6 or 7 seed upside, so I think we're starting to see that version now. Ultimately, I think this all kind of comes down to what does Russell Westbrook do when he's been playing better. They've been better. Bradley Beal's been unbelievable all year, but Westbrook, he's such a good player when he's right that's a huge help. But he's also so ball dominant that when he's bad, it's really going to go south. So when he's been good, they've looked a lot better. So sure, I mean, especially when you consider that the playoffs is the top 10 teams because of the whole play-in thing they're doing now. Making the playoffs doesn't seem even that complicated. So I think they certainly have more than a good chance to do that much, assuming that everybody stays healthy. What does that mean for the long haul, big picture? That part I think is far murkier. But in terms of this year, sure, I could see them being one of the top 10 teams in the East.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, not really tightly contested. I'm going to backtrack there, but like the East isn't as strong as teams in the West, in my opinion. I feel like this has been a trend for a while now that the teams in the East aren't as good as the teams in the West. But I mean, like the Wizards win over the Lakers. I mean, that's probably a fluke win. Yeah, the Lakers are a good team still, but still the Wizards have been getting good quality wins. And I feel like that's an opportunity for them to gain momentum, capitalize, and make their run to the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's been their trend the last couple of years where they play better against the better teams and then don't seem to show up as much against the lesser teams. They just gotten smoked by the Memphis Grizzlies the other day, who, not the worst team in the league, but whatever. Then they rally at home to beat the Clippers. Now, the Clippers didn't have Paul George in the East Coast and blah, blah, blah. But obviously, the Clippers had just smoked them in LA a couple weeks prior. And all that. You mentioned the Lakers, but yeah, they've had some really good wins lately. Look, I think that most teams have a level of talent that is competitive. It's just a matter of, do you consistently get it there night in, night out? That's where the coaching part comes into play, not just drawing up an X's and O's, but I mean, the players in theory should not need a coach to motivate them, but I mean, that's just how the world works. I mean, I don't wake up every single day going, you know what, I'm taking on the world today, by the bull by the horns, let's go. I mean, it would be sometimes you need a little encouragement or thought or somebody pushing you or pushing the right buttons or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's reasons to be optimistic if you're a fan, but I'm a realist. I think it's optimistic if you're really just, as some people are, hey, can we make the playoffs this year? Sure. Is this thing headed in the right direction? I don't know. I think this is a big offseason for them. There could be a coaching change. Brooks's contract is up. Could be a front office change. if all those things happen, then we'll see what direction they go in. There's always a threat that Bradley Beal could say, "Hey, I want to get out of here." I don't see any signs that that's happening, but that would be a big thing. And you need Rui Hachimura, Denny Avdia to develop. I guess Troy Brown's probably not in the mix at this point, but you need those guys to develop. And if all that happens, then things could be interesting. But right now, there's just too much in the air for me to be like everything is trending in the right direction. But at least for this year, things are a little more positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, big picture here with COVID and NBA starting up, I didn't really think there would be an all-star game, but they're putting everything together into one night for this sort of all-star night. Give me your thoughts on how you like that move from the NBA to combine everything all into one night.
Well, I think a lot of this is complicated. There is a lot of money involved. I think to pretend that there's not is unrealistic. I think we all have to live in the real world, and these are big companies, and it is sports and it is frivolous, but this is how people make their livelihood, right? So the league is basically like, well, we have to figure out a way to get this done. So they're taking everybody, I guess, to a degree, is taking the risk, flying around the country to go to Atlanta, right? And they're going to try to be as safe, I guess, as possible. So to jam it all into one night, I guess, makes some sense in that regard, to try to not spread this thing out the way they would normally. But at the same point, it is obviously a bit risky, to say the least, to have all these guys coming, flying around the country, coming together. But I don't know. I mean, the whole world has been weird. We've been trying to navigate this now for literally a year, and we've learned a lot in this time. I honestly can't believe it's been a year.
Me either. Me
either.
Really,
it's really hard to grasp. So like, I'm not sitting here going, yes, I get what the NBA is doing, and I don't care. I mean, it's concerning because I'm concerned about all these things, but at the same point, I also understand that it is a business, and we've gone this far. They're still traveling around the country for just to play the games, right? So this is a little more frivolous, but it is part of the business, so I understand.
Yeah, I feel like it's a part of the business any way you look at it for any of the sports leagues, because I feel like if the NFL were to just scrap the season due to the fact of this pandemic, or when COVID hit certain teams and the NFL paused, that would have cost a lot of money. Because I think these sports leagues revolve mostly around money, and that's one of the main reasons why I think teams and leagues are adapting to change during this pandemic, and giving fans something to watch during these uncertain times. And I'm glad they're doing it safely. And I mean, you saw it with the Caps and other teams in the NHL, the NFL, pretty much anywhere, fines getting handed out if anybody breaks COVID protocol or anything like that. Do you like the way that these leagues have been handling COVID so far?
Again, I think it's just tricky. I mean, it just being, look, again, like when this all came down a year ago, I mean, I don't think none of us had a clue what to do. And I wasn't sitting here going, well, the team should have this figured out, because obviously, how could anybody have this figured out? Even when the football team started training camp in the season, months later, but in August and September, we were all still like, well, how is this possibly going to work? I think that, I don't know. I think, like a lot of things in life, to a degree, you have to do the best you can to try to mitigate risk as much as possible. I mean, I guess I would just say this without getting like political about this. There were a lot of things happening in this country that were far more neglectful, happening at the highest levels, that were screwing this all up, and we're still paying for that price now because of the fact that we weren't taking this as serious action as we were. The teams all taken financial hits, probably the NFL less than the other one, because the league is just so popular, and was able to put, again, they were fortunate where the calendar broke, that they were in the off season and didn't have to lose too much. They lost preseason games, but that's not the same as Major League Baseball losing 100 games, and the NBA losing some as well, and the end of the regular season and some games this year. So I think it's been a lot of trial and error. I mean, knock on wood. Fortunately, it's been, I think, relatively fine how things have gone. But personally, for me, it's been more about how this country has handled stuff, and these leagues are part of all that. And they're all caught up in it, and they're one of the more public-facing companies out there because of the nature of sports. So all that said, it's very confusing, but at the same time, I think they tried to do the best they can, sort of enough, and I give them kudos for that. I mean, the NFL ultimately did make it through the year without too many issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, Ben Standig, writer for The Athletic, host of the Standig Room Only podcast. Ben, we appreciate you hopping on.
Hey, Josh, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. The Kirby on Sports podcast continues right after this.